personally think about the personal aspect of a leader. Sometimes there may be things going on personally that determine sometimes your leadership position, your stance, what you may feel passionate about, what you may not. So thinking just on the progression of your life, has there been a turning point that you can recall that somehow affected you as a leader?
There have been so many. I thought about this a bit. I was so thankful that you mentioned it earlier. So I wanted to mention a couple specifically. And
Okay.
then, like I said, we can go as deep as you want to go. I've got to mention my mother and father and the death of my mother and father. I'm an only child, and I think that for me, the impact of my mother in terms of my spiritual development, my first prayer, the shepherd's prayer, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not. And then her devout spiritual journey, which is ultimately manifested me in the ministry, which was not my chosen intent and intended path. But I experienced unconditional love from my mother. I was my mother's only child. And the stories that she used to tell me around the kitchen table, going to school during segregation and not being allowed to go to the public library, after she and my father were divorced and separated and, money tight for a minute. I mean, we were never dirt poor, But, like other families had to struggle. My mother actually went without eating sometimes to make sure that I had enough to eat. And I didn't know it then, but I realized it later. But it had just had an impact on me because I know what unconditional love looks like. And I think when people experience unconditional love, it shapes and kind of marks them and helps them to recognize real love as opposed to other stuff that people call love. Because the highest form of love in Christian tradition is agape love, self-sacrificial, God-like love, as opposed to these other things that people describe as love. My father died when he was 52 years old, at the top of his professional career. The first African-American service superintendent of HISD, second president of Houston Community College, chancellor of the University of Houston Downtown College, at the very time being considered and recognized as the leading candidate to become chancellor of the entire University of Houston system. And this is after earning his PhD in educational psychology from the University of Texas in the 60s, when very few African Americans, even worked on the custodial staff at UT. My father was earning his doctorate. And then he died at 52 when I was young. And, I'm an only child. I'm a junior. There are 3 Jew Don Boneys. My father, me, and my son. And he had not been ill that I was aware of. He'd not been ill before his death. He was he was young. He was near basically the top educator, black educator in Houston. And therefore, one of the top in the state. I mean, his professional accomplishments are legend. And he went home and to, his, and they called him and said, he's gone. Well, what do you mean? I just saw him. He's gone. And so that had an impact in not having a father, in the late 20s and the early 30s as I was beginning to make some moves. So that was one. Another one, During my early professional life, I wanted to be a professional broadcaster, radio and television. I wanted to serve as community relations director at a major broadcast affiliate, as well as a producer and a director and television host. I did all of that. And I experienced quite a bit of discrimination. And my hope and objective, actually Tony Brown was a great role model. Tony Brown's Black Journal, is to use the media, the mass media, to expose injustice, social problems, and to bring to light tools and programmatic opportunities that could help create and maintain, sustain a better world. That's not always the objective of mass media. If it did, we'd have a much more enlightened and engaged citizenry. A lot of times it's entertainment, a lot of times it's foolishness, a lot of times it's just conflict for conflict's sake. And as I began to, and a lot of times it's bias and prejudice. And so I experienced it early, struck me, and it made me go and study equal employment law. And then I faced it again after becoming the first African-American television director in the city of Houston. And when it happened again, I decided to fight. I filed a class action racial discrimination lawsuit. My attorney was Gabrielle McDonald, who served as a federal district judge at one point in her career, and then at the end of her legal career, she was an international criminal court judge at The Hague for the United Nations. Pretty good legal counsel. And I wrote myself a petition to deny their license from being renewed, Corinthian broadcaster, KHOU, and flew to Washington and filed it personally. Needless to say, I had a short-lived broadcast television career after that. I didn't, you know, I thought you could do these things and still, and I remember meeting with a general manager to talk about a job as a television director. He said, I'm not interested in hiring you. And I'm like, well, why did you make an appointment?
Right.
My naivete at the time that people who take those kinds of stances don't get rehired. They don't have longevity in their career track.
Why did he make the appointment?
I really don't know. I really don't know. But several things happened out of that. I had, at that time, 12 or 15 years of, because I started broadcast when I was 16 years old. I had 10, 12, 15 years of broadcast experience before I left college. I had a nationally distributed radio talk program in 23 states and over 100 affiliates in college. I had produced the first black television show and hosted it in Central Texas, Black Images. We created a black programming office at the University of Texas for the Longhorn Radio Network with a black director, a black producer, me as executive producer and host. In college, I'd come to Houston, major market. We'd done the whole thing, became the first black television director, and my career was ended. And I had to make a decision as to what I would do. And basically I decided to give up that career and go on a search. Out of that, I ended up in the ministry because it was such, you know, and I had to go back and calculate what age it was. So it was, you know, mid-20s, something like that, late 20s, something like that. The hopes and dreams that I had as a somewhat naive young adult destroyed. And trying to figure out and make a commitment, my father was still alive, saying, it's going to be all right. And you know how, when you have these traumatic experiences as you grow into adult, and people say, it's going to be all right, you're like, yeah, right. Right.
Yes.
But over time you realize these things happen all the time. And sometimes it's not what happens, it's how you respond to them. And I just made a decision, a prayerful, Lord, please, I'll do whatever. And it ended up with me making a commitment of devotion and ended up ordained as a minister. And the last thing that I had intended. I wasn't a bad person,
right.
But the level of devotion and discipline was not what I had in mind. But anyway, so that had a marked impact on my life. It changed my career. It probably no doubt saved my life because of the kind of obligations I think I have, and it therefore shaped my life. Because I do see love as being sacrificial and other-centered as opposed to self-centered. And the faith aspect removed all doubt and removed all fear. And I think sometimes when people look at my political work, my movement work, my organizing work, it's that, a lot of people wouldn't do what you've done. I don't know about a lot of people. I know that I'm not afraid. There have been cross burnings, there have been death threats, there have been somebody shot in my home. The police said with a rifle. I wasn't there. I was out of town. There's been all kinds of those kinds of things. But I've never been afraid. And we have survived. So I guess, does that qualify as an answer to
yes,
your
definitely.
Give you some, okay.
You want to take a pause? Can we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's talk about, has there been, when you talk about, first now we talked about turning points, has there been a strategic decision that you feel like you have ever had to make that led to maybe a major shift or a turning point, maybe in a particular movement that you were involved in, or in the direction besides going from the media to political? So has there been a decision that you can see that you've made strategically that has sort of created a turning point for you?
Maybe one, and I want to make sure I understand the question, because coming out of that transformative experience after Channel 11 and accepting what we say in the Christian tradition, the call to the ministry. In other words, in the Baptist Christian tradition that I come from, a person does not decide to go into the ministry.
Okay.
God has to call them, and they have to answer. So it's not like a career move. And it certainly wouldn't have been for me. But I accepted the call. And then that particular journey has been dynamic. And, looking back, we see a lot of the things that happen in life begin to make sense. These things seem to have happened for a reason, and then they're all connected together. So when you talk about decisions, for me, many times they weren't decisions to go left or right, it was to do or not do.
Okay.
And in doing or not doing, these other things happen.
Okay.
So one decision wasn't, and it's also been interesting that a lot of opportunities that I was able to take advantage of seemed to either open for me as opposed to someone else, or not be open and open for me. So when I first started the first radio program in Austin, Texas, Solar Nights when I was at UT. They didn't have any black programming. And somebody had talked to the program director about it that summer, and they expressed an interest, then they never came back at that time. They came back years later. He's doing it now. It's John Henson. We don't know why John did not come back. And so when I kind of popped up, they were like, we've been thinking about that, looking for somebody. We don't really even have anybody else to consider. Do you want to do it? Here, go for it. And kind of the rest is history. When some other things happened, it was similar. So when I was at the university, and I didn't talk about this, but my movement work began at the University of Texas when I and some other African American students were approached by a faculty member for a class and for what ended up being the development of a student movement to end racial discrimination at the University of Texas. The university had what we asserted were discriminatory admissions policies. Primary admissions criteria for UT at that time was the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test. All the educators and academics have validated that the SAT is culturally biased. That's your primary tool for admissions, and it's culturally biased, and you've got a discriminatory criteria. It either has to go or you have to modify your criteria to include other variables. We were able to do that. We ended up negotiating with the Board of Regents while Lady Bird Johnson was a member of the board. We also forced the university to create a minority student recruitment program, Project Info, funded with $40,000. We also, as part of our demands, said that you will not eliminate, kill the Black Studies program, which they recently started, and you're going to keep the Hispanic Studies program. And we actually named the next director of the program, Geneva Gay. Of course, I'm sure the administration said we just advised. But the whole point in doing that, we organized a black student movement. We organized a black organization, Concerned Students. We organized a black, brown, white coalition, the first African American Hispanic coalition in UT's history. We carried out a number of actions. Those were all based on studying Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was the founder of the Industrial Heirs Foundation, which is a citizens organization.